Welcome to Performance Driven Living, the podcast where we question everything. We don't tiptoe around tough topics, we walk right into them. Not to provoke, but to get closer to what's real. You might not agree with everything you hear, and that's okay. The show isn't about being right, it's about being real. These conversations are meant to stretch your thinking, challenge assumptions, and spark something deeper. The views shared are those of our guests and may not reflect those of the host or team. And while we dive deep into health, performance, and transformation, this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor before making changes to your health or lifestyle. Take what lands, leave what doesn't. But whatever you do, don't stop questioning.
We are back on the Performance Driven Living podcast. And again, this is the podcast where I get to learn a lot of stuff, and you get to learn a lot of the stuff because I'm learning a lot of stuff. So I bring on some really cool guests so that we can learn stuff together. And today I have the distinct privilege of welcoming our guest, Dr. Ligia Mihut. Now, I know how to say your name correctly because I went to Romania once. And they call me a schmecker for any Romanian people that are listening. But Dr. Mihut actually is a writing professor and soon to be faculty member at the University of Miami, starting in the fall. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And the author of a new book right now with Pittsburgh Press, correct? University of Pittsburgh Press, called Immigrants, Brokers, and Literacy as Affinity, a powerful work that captures the stories and struggles of Romanian immigrants chasing the American dream, which I find exciting for a couple of reasons. One, because I happen to know, because we talked before, that you're in the process of becoming an American citizen. How many Supreme Court justices are there?
9.
Very good. Okay,
Thank you for your help.
You're welcome. I'm helping people become American citizens. Thank you for your service. So the topic I really want to discuss here today, because you're a writing professor, you're teaching students, you've been at Barry University here for 10 years, you've done your master's and your PhD in the United States, an immigrant yourself from Romania, having grown up in the communist country of Romania under Ceausescu. You've seen it all. You've seen a lot, right? And I'm saying a little bit of your story for you, but the fact that you are an immigrant who's become a doctor of I did get a doctor of philosophy, but specifically, I mean, you've been teaching English and creative writing, but literacy in general, and have done a lot of research, and your passion is into immigration, which is amazing because that's your story, and a lot of time in people's pain is their purpose, right? And I love that, like your own story and your own struggle turns into your purpose, and that obviously is this. But I see your purpose as being different than the show notes. So I'm going to really rock things here because I know that you're a person, because you're a close personal friend of mine, and I will say that I know you're a person who loves preparedness, and the fact that you showed up to be a guest on a podcast with a notepad is hilarious to me. But
I'm trying to take notes.
It's true, but
listen to your questions.
Oh, that's good. So okay, so I'm going to pivot the topic a little bit here because knowing you on a personal level, I think you've got an incredible amount of value to a listener in being able to help shape some of this story that I want to unfold here, and that is your book is obviously about immigrants and the necessity of language in order to help a person adapt into a new culture. And for anybody who speaks more than one language, we know that a lot of times we may know all the nouns and the verbs, but the nuances are completely lost. The fact that you can be there and communicate, but you still feel ostracized somehow. And I think that's an incredible thing. But I want to talk real quick, not even real quick, I want to talk for the next 40 minutes about the topic of storytelling. Because one of the purposes that I find in my life, one of my passions is helping people tell their stories. But one of the things that I've identified as you as a person, and even some of the show notes and, you know, the telling the story of an immigrant, is that we as humans have a inherent need. And I would love for you to just like start by telling me your thoughts on this topic. Like, we want to be seen. And one of the most painful things I think that a person can go through is not being seen. And I think that your passion and your drive is to make the unseen of the world be seen. And you do that through storytelling. And you do that through helping people learn how to tell their stories in significant ways. And noticeable ways, and I'll say even respectable ways, because a story poorly told isn't a good story. And you bring to life out of people their own stories. You know, maybe nowadays more with ChatGPT, but nevertheless, like their stories are being told because you as a college professor are able to help young people, particularly at Barry University. That's a lot of immigrant students who are foreign students coming to school there. Like, you're able to help them bring out in their second language, often, a story that hasn't been told.
Okay. So, as I was saying, I was listening very carefully to your question because you used the word to be seen rather than to be heard.
Yeah.
So you use a visual word, and when someone tells their story, we often think of it as an auditory. It involves,
this is what happens when you get a language professor on your podcast. But it's a great nuance. I love that.
So I think storytelling, and what I want to emphasize with that is that storytelling is very interesting because it does involve, in my opinion, the entire, it's a holistic approach to the individual. So if you think of, sights and hearing and senses, it's very experiential. So in that way, it's very powerful. So going back to that idea of being seen and what happens in the, let's say, in the shadows, I think there's a lot of growth and a lot of interesting work, let's put it that way, that happens in the shadows. And in fact, if we go back to the title of my book, there's a word in there, brokers, that is not a very common, but that it's not a very common term that we use, maybe in the context, business,
yeah.
Right? Not in writing, or in the literacy field, but even so, I would say for a general audience, you would probably think twice as to what would you associate it with. But in my book and the way in which I see it, and that's one of the revelations that I had after more than a decade of research, is the brokers do the invisible work of.
Define what you mean by broker.
So brokers are those people, mediators, those that build bridges.
Okay, so not necessarily the immigrant themselves, but the person who helps that transition take place.
Correct. They could be immigrants themselves, but they're in So
you'd consider yourself a broker?
Yes. I would be considered a broker of literacy, but oftentimes brokers are really those that are more, they do the daily work of the more invisible work. They're not, so I'm more of a sponsor of literacy, the one that is official, right? Because I'm, let's say, in the classroom teaching,
Yeah, you're
deciding,
not the tutor who's helping the person learn a language.
Correct. So the distinction would be perhaps the tutor, or perhaps someone that is a peer, a colleague, that, asks the right question at the right time so the story can be told, can move forward.
So from there, I want to take one step back because I don't want to get into, to me, I'm going to tell you my interest in the conversation more is, and I love that. I love the book. I love the concept of brokerage that, we as people are helping other people along the way, right? I always use in the marketing world, I always say that we're a storyteller, and for me as a brand to be able to help a consumer find a product, we have to act. And I always use the Lord of the Rings, right? It's that I'm not Gandalf, or I'm not the brand itself needs to be Gandalf, that Frodo's the hero, right? It's the Frodo, the Hobbit, which is the consumer, is the hero of the story. And I'm here to be Gandalf and just help coach the person along the journey. And in brokerage, I'm seeing there's a lot of Gandalf there, right? Like the broker's the person who's kind of helping the protagonist through the story. But I want to take, I know you speak such academic language, and I'm like, oh, it's like that story, the fairy tale. Like, I'll take it all into some bottom shelf language here. But my question for you, I want to go one step back to that, because when we talk about storytelling, I want to first dive into the importance of that story. And I love the nuance of being seen versus being heard, because there is, I want both, right? It's not an and or, it's a both. Like, I want to be heard. I also want to be seen. I want to be understood. I want to be, and the word that I'll use is I want to be validated, I think, is where more people are there, right? It's not that they want their stories told. They want their stories validated, that I want my struggles to be recognized as being real, and with immigration being such a hot button right now in our country, I think it's important that we kind of unpack that a little bit, because the academics of immigration is great, but we're in this deportation. We're under an administration that's very much stop illegal immigration, and there's people on both sides of this argument. And I kind of want to touch on that, and I don't want to be political in our conversation, but I think there's politics to be had in some of that, because here's the deal. When N equals 1,000,000, things are dehumanized. But when N equals 1, it's very hard to talk about an individual without talking about an individual's story. Right. And if I talk about immigration is bad, get out of my country, that's easy to say to a large group of people. Right. When I talk about you need to get out of my country, it's become very personal. And then we start saying, yeah, but what about the mom who, was abused so badly back in her country that she fled? Or what about the political asylum? What about the oppressed? What about this is just a family trying to get out of poverty? Like, all of those are legitimate stories. Right. Like, and mass, it's illegal, go home. But in individual N equals 1 conversations, I don't know that I don't even know. I mean, I'm not a fan of illegal immigration, right? Like, if it's illegal, it's illegal. It needs to be dealt with legally. And if we need to change the legal system, then we need to change the legal system. But we follow the rules, and that's kind of where I land. But I also know that when we get into an individual story, if you were to say, look, so-and-so in your life is in the country illegally, are you going to, tell him or tell her to go back to their country? Like, would I be able to look that person in the face and say, you need to leave? Right. Because when N equals 1, it's now relational. It's not transactional. Correct. And I think the more we can get into large numbers, the more transactional these decisions feel. And yet when we start getting into the I keep saying the N equals 1, but the individuals are relational. And I believe that part of your purpose and part of what you do is to tell individual stories, which begins to humanize these transactional and mass numbers. Yes. So when you're telling stories and you're helping people verbalize their struggles, and you're helping people do this from a classroom, I mean, that's your position of influence, is from a classroom and from a mentorship standpoint on a university campus. How does that psychologically, I want to say, and emotionally work for a student, for an immigrant student who's come into this country with whatever, but it's like they want to be known, like being seen, being heard, being felt, being understood, being validated. How does that, how do you see that affecting people? And you can answer the question as, based on what you have experienced with students, but I would equally ask you, how does it speak to your own story?
Okay, so
giant question.
It has. That's why I need to take notes,
write it
right?
down.
So there are definitely 2 parts. There are multiple parts to the question that you propose here for discussion, right? So, first of all, there is a preconceived notion that personal or individual stories, you mentioned, are not public or political.
I don't know that I agree with that. I think politically we talk about big numbers because it dehumanizes populations, and then both sides, and you watch it at the State of the Unions, right? Like, so and so who's in the room tonight had an experience with this, and I'm going to give you a medal to award you. And it's like, yeah, because you took an N equals 1.
Right. Let me rephrase that. In academia, the personal has been traditionally devalued.
Agreed, because academia prefers,
because it's not,
they prefer quantitative research.
Because they prefer rationality. They prefer an argument that is evidence-driven, and while the personal can serve as a way to advance a claim, it's generally not. So one way in which we can counteract that is create more spaces where individual stories, whether it's students, whether it's an immigrant student, whether it's a student, a first-gen student, right? So socioeconomically marginalized, or or an adult student, a mom that has dropped out of college in order to raise kids, and then comes back in order to continue her education. So, there are different types of stories that we encounter. So creating spaces, I think that's a very important.
And when you say spaces, are we talking like platforms? Are you talking like?
This is a space, right? So this is one space. Platforms is one, but even in the curriculum, right? So, for instance, we have at Barry University, actually one of our most successful assignments was a literacy memoir. It's a way of telling your story. It's a narrative type. And one thing that was interesting for us is that where do you locate that in the curriculum? Should it come at the end? Should it come in the middle? Should it come at the very beginning? And we used to have it at the very beginning because it was a way in which we started to know the students early on, and it created a community. It built a community of learning and a community of trust and empathy that otherwise, if you delay that, unfortunately, we had to move it towards the end. But the rationale for that at the end of the semester of the specific class, the rationale for that was in order to help the student finish the semester on a lighter note with a personal essay rather than with a research paper when everybody's hitting every single student with a research paper or big project.
Sure.
So, there was a somewhat good reason for that, but
I agree with you. Like building relationship early actually leads to academic success. And I mean,
right. And I recently I had a situation. So if we give specific examples without necessarily providing names, but I had a student that should have failed the class because of the rationality, the number of absences, the work submitted, and then he submitted his literacy memoir. And I mean, when I read it, I cried. So it told the story of how, of course, he ran away from home and a few other things. He is an immigrant student, but it was the story of how his single mom raised him and how they had to walk for 2 hours because no bus would stop to pick up, this single lady with 3 kids. And it was not just, he was an amazing storyteller. It was not just what he said, but also how he said it that was highly impactful. And I really thought, I was weighing everything, including being ethical towards my other students that did come to class. But I really thought that the student had particular circumstances that he wasn't even able to articulate, not necessarily to me. And this is where maybe if we tie it back to brokers and sponsors, when I was trying to make decisions whether he should pass or not, I reached out to his advisor, who should have been his advocate,
Right.
his broker. And he didn't have anything to say. So interestingly, he didn't really...
he didn't even know his own
and
advisee, yeah.
That's one situation when I felt sad, because here's a student that could have, with the right coaching, if someone had advocated for him, it could have been a different story. And I hope in my feedback, I tried to convey that to him.
Yeah.
Some of the things that if I had known early on, I would have. I mean, I cannot advise every student, but this was a particular case. Like, speaking of specific cases,
Well, and you say that, and it makes me think. Like, I'm always a person. I use the words relational and transactional all the time.
Yeah.
That we tend to be very transactional in lives, and part of the reason about that is because relational interactions are messy.
Yeah.
Transactions are very clean. Like the math.
The rationality versus,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. The rationality makes sense. And as
Right.
you know, and some of our listeners know, like, I was a college professor for years. So it's like, and I worked in inner city schools for the most part with disadvantaged students. So it's like, while they
Right.
weren't necessarily immigrants, these were the unsung, people of inner cities, like whose stories also seldom get told, because it's much easier to marginalize through transactions and rationality, and say, you're not motivated, you don't do well, as opposed to, how can I relationally have empathy for your situation, and how can I help pull you forward, right? And the problem is the relational side of those transactions, they're harder. It's messier, it's sloppier, it's emotional, and yet in relationships and in a relational N=1 storytelling, that's influence. And often, and I would arguably say that influence is much more powerful than rationality. Right. Because people make stupid decisions all the time. Like, we've started wars over influence that had absolutely no rationale. Mm-hmm. And yet people fought for causes that made no sense. People fight in battles where they know they're going to lose. And they do so based off of that relational, messy, sloppy side of life that isn't calculated. Right. And it's why I come back to this whole concept of storytelling, to say you're facilitating people's stories getting told. And in that facilitation, you're a very logical, pragmatic person, and you understand data and you understand the academic side of this, except it's interesting because you're pouring a bunch of academic into the top of this funnel, and at the bottom coming out with a very influential case. So it's like you're almost taking rationality and bringing the emotion into it through the power of storytelling. And I believe that a good story changes the world, right? And what's the phrase that you use all the time? Like, never let facts get in the way of a good story. That all the facts in the world are irrelevant, because if I can sway you through emotion, or I can sway you through some other form of influence, it's important. And I think that's actually more powerful than data. As much as I'm a data-driven person, influence and storytelling, my gosh, it's so much more powerful, right? Like, people are listening to this podcast, they're not looking at the statistics of it, right? Because they want that. And I even, as a college professor, I use the word edutainment all the time. Because, they want the figures, but they want to be entertained through it, right? Like, there needs to be that. My question to you is, I pass the baton back to your half of the conversation here, but I want to say, in that influence, in that storytelling, that N=1, you wield an incredible amount of power, because sometimes the wrong stories get told. Sometimes the right stories get told poorly. And sometimes influence falls into the hands of people who it doesn't. Sometimes grace is given to grace by its definition is undeserving, but I would say that you're giving this student a break because his story moved you. But another student with the exact same story who didn't tell it the same way may have failed the class. Because that's fair, right? Like, there's probably a lot of other students that you failed in classes who just didn't tell their story as well. This guy happened to bring you to tears, so he got a break. And I know that hurts to say, right? Because you're like, man, I guess that's probably true. Maybe I didn't.
Because I use more rationale. I have other,
But truly though,
No, I
I mean,
understand.
there are students who I've cut breaks for, and there's others who I've just said absolutely not. Like, you turned it in late. It's the end of the semester. You're cutting into my time, and I'm going out of town soon. Other times I've been like, you smiled really nice when you were in class, and you seemed really sweet. And I know you're a single mom, and like, and you cut breaks based on these non-pragmatic, non-logical patterns that we see, and it's all, and it could be nothing more than we relate to the person somehow. You as an immigrant professor see immigrant students all day long. I'm certain that your relationship with them is different than mine, because I'm an American-born white guy.
Right.
Like, I wouldn't have that same connection. And I mean, I worked in inner city schools. Like, I was the minority.
Right.
My question for you is, I was just saying, like, you wield a weapon here in helping people understand how to tell their stories. But I want to know, when you're dealing with a student, when you're dealing with an immigrant who, because I want to get into a responsibility conversation in this, but when you're dealing with a student or someone who is an immigrant, when you're trying to help them tell their story, with great power comes great responsibility, right? We learned that from Spider-Man. How does it make that person feel when their story is told? And that may be auditorial, that may be visual, that may mean whatever, but to a population of people who feel unseen or unheard, what do you see happen in that person? And that could be emotionally, physiologically. Like, do you see it when they actually see their story on paper? Like, what happens?
Well, it depends on the story, right? Because, as I said, some of the stories that my students write could be about immigration, learning a language, adapting to being here. Some could be, with COVID. I have several students that have had somewhat traumatic experiences through COVID, and being secluded, or just falling behind, and some of them, I think some of them are just are excited to be able to talk about it, to write about it, to process. So I don't think there's always the big aha moment, and I think this is, in a way, the beauty of storytelling, that each individual has his or her own process of making sense of their narrative, right? And with that, my story of immigration is very different. For instance, I would say it's 90% different from the people that I've interviewed for my book. So I'm not the typical immigrant.
Well, but go ahead.
So in that sense, and I'm not the one that a lot of immigrants, they, say, when you introduce my book, using in part my bio, is they're in pursuit of the American dream, right? So it seems like a straight shot. Stories are not always like that. They
Never.
happen in, right?
Chapter by chapter.
Exactly, right? Step by step. So I think it's very important. It depends where the student, where the student is, or the person that, whose story we want to help be told. Sometimes we are in the middle. Sometimes we are at the beginning. Sometimes, and with that, if you don't, and I'm going to come back to responsibility, because there's something very important. There's point of view is very important in a story, right? We can have the same experience. You tell it, like, this room, you will have a different angle, different vision, right, than I do, even if we are seated at the same table. Correct. And we have we are both engaged in the same conversation, right? So point of view is very important, and that's what happens with immigrants or with any other issue, is how we frame it, right? From whose perspective? And also there's, with immigrants, there's this dichotomy between, the immigrant as the hero story, right? Or the foe. He's the enemy. But there's so much that happens. There's so much in between, and it's not always either or. There's multiple layers of stories that.
So you mentioned the immigrant as the hero versus the immigrant as the foe, and I mean I can't help but draw a political parallel there, right? Because there's one side that's being demonized and saying that all immigrants are bad, and it's like no one over there said that. And there's another side that says, oh, immigrants are heroes. Our whole country's been built on their backs, and it's like
exactly.
And even the criminals are not criminals, and it's like I don't think they're saying that either.
Right.
I think that there's a lot of shades in the middle of those two polarizations. Mm-hmm. But the stories that are being told are they, and I'll use the phrase, we give way too much credit to they, because no one even knows who they are, but they seem to have very strong opinions. Yeah. But if I'm right leaning, I believe that we need to purge the country of anybody who's illegal. But that message gets turned around to all immigrants are terrible. We need to throw Melania Trump out of the country. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, nobody said that. But then if I'm left leaning, it's this, well, even MS-13 gang members need to be allowed full citizenship, and we need to give them, 5 acres of land because they're all good people who are just trying to make a better life for themselves. And I'm like, I don't think anybody on the left is saying that either. But the point of view that you're saying is that they're telling these stories about each other, and it's not based on data. It's based on the more powerful story gets the greater influence.
Right, and so that's actually what my book is trying to do. It's like trying to fill that middle ground. Because actually when I started my research in the community, interestingly, everyone was trying to point me to, here is a key word that I wanted to go back to, is access to the story. When somebody tells you a story, they're giving you access, so you want to, it's a privilege.
Yeah.
To actually be part of that. And I had that privilege to be provided access, and I can explain that a little bit more as to how it operated. Something, that most people would say, oh, you're a Romanian immigrant, there's a direct consequence of that I have access to the Romanian community.
Right. Thinking that you're privileged to get into the community because of your position.
Correct. I have one thing that did give me some, access, which was the language and one friend. But it gave me access to think about clusters. Okay, so this is how, there's clusters of people and interests. There's immigrants of different ages. There's waves of immigration. I came with a particular wave. I didn't come as a refugee. I didn't leave Romania in the 80s when,
communism was at its high,
right. And some of them left with brown passports, which were passports of no citizenship. Like Romania at the time, those that wanted to leave, like they absolutely severed any ties with those that wanted to leave the country. So it was a very, traumatic experience for many of them who left.
Well, and I want to interject there real quick, because you bring up this topic of brown passport, and it's like, I would tie all of this, so much of this, I would tie back to identity. And that being known, being seen, having an identity. And it's like, you're saying people with brown passports were a citizen of no country.
Non-citizen.
It wasn't that they didn't have a home, it's that they were stripped of identity.
Correctly.
And being stripped of identity, like I can't think of anything that's more painful, right? Like that is the, that's Nazi-like, right? That's a strip people down and remove their dignity. And by removing dignity, they don't resist. They don't fight back. And the fight back isn't about a fight. It's about an easier to control. Right. So again, the people who control the stories are the people who have control. Yeah, which is why there's such a fight in the story world.
Right. So when I started to gain access, right, they wanted to, I'm going to take it back to the foe versus hero, right? They said, why don't you interview this person, he's a doctor, why don't you interview this person, all the successful people that have made it. And so it was very interesting to me, like how they wanted to be represented, right? How the community wanted to be represented through, successful visible professions, right? So think about, coming back to your notion of identity, it's not just political and public identity, but it's also professional identity.
Positive affiliation.
Right. So if you were a doctor in Romania, good luck with being a doctor here, right? So, it's it's a harder transfer of knowledge, of skills and everything, right? So there's always a bit of a downward mobility for certain folks. And it all depended it depended on language, actually, a lot of it, right? So if they had the ability to speak English and to adapt more easily, then they were able to transfer some of their skills. But if not, then they kind of went and tear down.
All of that. And I mean, I think you're bringing a very, I love the fact that we're humanizing stories, because I think the power of story gets overlooked too often. That everyone has an identity, but that identity doesn't mean anything to anybody else unless it's able to be verbalized and told. Because we all have an identity, right? We all have a past. We all have a struggle. We all have all of these things. And, we hear the stories about never judge somebody because you don't know what they've been going through kind of situation. And it's like, well, yeah, I get it. But we do tend to live in a somewhat myopic world that I really don't think about the struggles of everybody else because I'm too busy thinking about my own struggles. But when we get back to this concept of, again, I go back to storytelling, right? I get the concept of the book. I get the idea of brokerage and language and so on and so forth. But I want to get into the responsibility of the storyteller again, because if I'm a really good storyteller, I can manipulate people. And if I'm a really bad storyteller, the reality is I may end up finding myself vulnerable to being misunderstood. And I would say that, what do they say? History is written by the victors. That we seldom know the story of the people who didn't win because those aren't the ones we write the stories about. And yet when we take this topic of immigration and we take this topic of individuals' stories being told, I don't think if we lined everybody up and gave them 30 minutes to explain, why would we do that? And I would give you an example and tell you that recently I was reading a book and it was talking about the ability of a judge to be able to grant parole to people. And they statistically using it, I don't remember who wrote the book, but it was one of the authors, like a Malcolm Gladwell kind of author who's taking a look at social phenomenon. And for a parolee to have a meeting first thing in the morning, he was more likely going to be granted parole than if the parolee was granted a meeting right before lunch. And it was just the idea that the judge saw the person while he was hungry made the decision. And they actually set up a separate decision maker where AI was able to go through the files of people who were on parole and make the decisions, and found out that based on the information and just fact checking that AI was able to actually do a better job of predicting a person's guilt or innocence than a judge. And that if they actually took these cases and adjudicated them using AI, because the AI is not influenced. The AI is not influenced because, the girl that was on trial was really pretty and looked sweet. And it's not influenced because the guy there reminded me of my nephew. It's none of that.
It's acontextual, yeah.
Right. And because of that, they were able to, kind of say out and say, we as humans, we're biased. Right. But storytelling allows us to sway the bias. So in that respect, I really do go back to that. With great power comes great responsibility. As a storyteller and as a person who's training people to be able to tell their stories properly, I think there's a being seen, being heard from the side of the immigrant population that you work with, whether that's out of campus or on campus. And I know that's going to be changing for you soon as you move to the University of Miami. So total switch. But what are some of the ways, I really want to get into for the listeners, in our last minutes here, I want to dive into, and it's super interesting about storytelling in general, but to a listener, we're affected by story, right? We go to the movies to watch stories. We read books to hear stories. We're emotionally captivated by storytelling. how does a person maintain objectivity when listening to a story and filtering through those things? How do we find ourselves affected by that and be able to make rational decisions? Or, conversely, how do we tell our stories in ways that are more captivating? Do you have tips for somebody that can understand how to be more persuasive when storytelling?
Oh, for that, you would have to sign up to take a class.
Oh, she's selling tuition now.
So you're asking me to sell my tips here without...
Not sell them at all. Give them away for free.
For free. So here's the thing. One way to think about it is I think we need to start asking better questions.
I like that.
So oftentimes, I have an accent, clearly.
What?
And instead of asking someone, whether it's me or anyone else, but, where are you from when you hear the accent?
Yeah.
If you reframe that and ask the question, how many languages do you speak?
Wow, that's interesting.
And how did you learn them? How many languages do you speak? Do you use I can ask you that. It's a real question, right? Do you use Duolingo, or where did you learn in school? Did you learn from, speaking with your abuela, or you all of a sudden, right? I'm getting, so the questions, one of the things that I work with my students when we also have interviews that they do in the community. So I really love community-based research, but it's the academics is often phrased as distinct from what happens in the real world. And I think for a good reason, it has been perceived as the ivory tower, but that's changing a lot of it. So I think of research as, if you break down the word research, right? So a way of searching.
Right, to look again.
Right, exactly, reframing. So the same thing happens here with language. You reframe what you just noticed. You noticed something, and that allows you to hear a different story rather than a one word, well, I'm from Romania. Well, what does that tell you? Have you been, you could connect to it because you've been to Romania, but someone else would be like, is that Transylvania? Is that in the middle of the country? No, it's not Pennsylvania. So learning to ask better questions. And I think that goes to actually curiosity.
Yeah.
You cannot ask a fake question.
And to the point, we try to categorize information, and by asking the question, where are you from? I then apply all biases I have. If I knew people from Romania I didn't like, I immediately assign you to the I don't like you group, even at a subconscious level. Or if I know people from Romania, as the case when I met you, I know people from Romania that I love. So when you told me you were from Romania, that actually triggered positive limbic response out of me. Yeah. But there may be other places or other people groups that we don't have that same limbic response to. But I love the way that you're saying reframing that question and how many languages do you speak, because it stops the categorization.
Right. It really opens up. It allows the person to actually tell you a story.
Correct. And it humanizes the narrative rather than trying to categorize.
Yeah. And then, so that's one
That's
tip.
a buzz for me, right? Just the idea that to humanize people rather than categorize people. I'm going to use that one in the future. I really love those words for that, because we do have a tendency to want to categorize. And if we spent more time humanizing, it would probably shape the way that we interact with people differently.
Right, and it does go back to language, right? The language that we use. And then I would say a point of view, one revelation, which it goes to reframing, but it's a reframing of how we tell the story, right? I think that allows us to to hear different voices, to maybe see the same event, as I said, from different angles. I think that's a very useful skill no matter what, right? In relationships, the same, there was a conflict, right? Okay, well, his story, her story, all of that, like that's a point of view.
Well, and everybody in a conflict thinks they're right.
Right. I mean, again, you're the hero. Can you retell the story? So one piece of advice would be tell one of the most important, memorable events that has marked you, right? And now, maybe write one detailed paragraph. Okay, now retell that from a different point of view. Or focus it on a different, like where you're not the hero of the story.
I was interesting. I was recently, my dad has a podcast, and I actually went on his podcast because I'd released my book, Radical Generosity. And
congratulations.
And thanks. And he had done a podcast on it with I want to introduce you and so on. But it was funny because one of the stories that I told in this book was actually a story of when I was a small child, and it was with him, and it was the two of us. And it was funny because as we're doing this podcast, he's like, he kind of hinted at tell us that story. But then after I told the story, he told the story from his point of view.
Like, those are the things
I got to listen to my memory from someone else's eyes.
Yeah.
And it was like,
that's amazing.
Oh, that was interesting because it's like, he's like, well, actually what happened that day was I was blah, 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 blah. And it's like, to me, I'm like, you just randomly showed up and wanted to go deliver gift baskets to the Salvation Army. And he's like, well, actually what was going on was this, this, and this. And I wanted to do this because I was listening to a radio program, and then the radio program was actually saying this, and that's why we went. And I'm like, oh, wow, I don't remember that detail. And he's like, well, do you remember where the house was that we went and delivered? I'm like, I was probably 8, 9 years old. I have no idea. It was in Detroit. Like, that's all I remembered was it was in Detroit. Like, and he's like, it was actually down in such and such a neighborhood. And if you don't remember, that's actually close to where Grandpa used to live. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, but the point of view was kind of like, wow, there's so many other characters in our stories.
Right, exactly.
And we seldom see the story from other people's perspectives because we're so used to the narrative that we rehearse all over our own memories, right? Yeah. Like we tell ourselves a story all the time and don't stop and listen to the other side of that. Yeah. So, Ligia, thank you so much for being here. But the question I have is like, I keep wanting to, I want to give you the last word in the conversation, if you can believe that.
I can. You're generous.
My hallucination here is, if I can use Tony Robbins' words, that the ability to be able to tell a story is validating. That people often feel as if they are validated because of that. And I will say, when I first met you many years ago, I think there was a part of you that in the social circle that we had met, that there was a part of you that felt like you were the outside of something like that, even though several people in that group were immigrants, but they were all immigrants from a similar culture. Mm-hmm. And your culture was different from where anyone else was, because most of them are Latin and you're Eastern European.
Right, as Romania is known as a Latin island in a Slavic sea.
Yes. but
geographically.
But your experience, I mean, you grew up in communism. You grew up as the daughter of a pastor, so you were automatically ostracized by society, particularly in a communist nation, and then grew up in academic, in a world where women should be seen and not heard. And so many things that are part of your identity and are part of your history. And then again, my point of view coming into a story, I'm like, here's a girl who you're a PhD college professor, and yet you feel out of place amongst a group of people, but it's because they had a shared experience, right? Like they grew up in a Latin population. They spoke they spoke a second language, but their second language was the same as each other. But we live down here in South Florida, so people speaking Spanish isn't weird. When you get the opportunity to tell your story, when people ask you to hear you, what are the highlights that you lean on? Because I've told some of the darker moments, right? You grew up under communism. You grew up as the third or fourth children. You grew up as a village outcast, if you will, because your father was a pastor, and you lived under a microscope because everybody wanted to see the church fail. I know because of a personal relationship that it's like you remember gunshots on Christmas Day, the day of the rebellion that overthrew communism in Romania. But what are the highlights of your story that you would want people to know?
That's a great question. I think...
How many languages do you speak?
The highlight of my story is, in a way you kind of said it, because I almost feel like I've always been a minority wherever I would, whether I was in Romania, because I was an evangelical, our family, we were evangelical, we were, being, and I just wanted to blend in. And ironically, this is something you haven't mentioned. I was an outlier in my own family. I always thought that I was adopted because now you cannot really see, but I have curly hair. And when I was young, I was super curly. And I always thought that I was the adopted one, that I did not belong to the family because, I looked different. I think some of the really good things that I want to emphasize that are part of my story is that I did grow up under communism, but it has taught me the things that really matter. The identities, the values that really matter. When you make a choice to declare, I am this, I am an evangelical, or my father would go to school and say, my kids are not going to school on Sundays to cheer for the party. My kids are going to church. That's a very bold statement. And I always thought, like, how is my dad not afraid and to go? And so in a way, as a child, I was both fearful and I also admired my father for doing that, right? But I also so values, right? It has instilled in me a set of values that you have to know what you believe, and also you have to understand that your values are permanent. Political governments, even dictatorships, are temporary.
Yeah.
And they crumble. So the fact that I did hear gunshots on Christmas, but I also I was born in a dictatorship. I did not know, unlike my parents, right? Mm-hmm. I did not know what was before, right? So I was born in the dark, so to say, right? But I experienced the paradox of something that seems so like a strong government crumble. That's crossing the border for the first time. Like, that's an amazing issue just to get ice cream. And then when the borders opened, we just drove into Hungary, we got ice cream, and we came back to Romania. So values, know what you believe, and no matter, what happens, you have to know who you are and what you believe in. And that's very essential. I also had an amazing community. I grew up with, I'm in the middle child. And my brother and my older sister and my younger sister, I was surrounded by people by being in the middle. And that's what I love, being around people. My parents once sent me to my grandma and, which was about 3-4 hours away. And then they called back within an hour and within a few days and said, you have to come get her because she's not eating. That was a bad sign because I loved eating. I missed my siblings. I wanted to be with my siblings. I wanted and I grew up in a community that was, they were highly educated. It was a competition, and they were a little bit older than me. So my brother is about 4 years older than me. I'm in my mid-40s. And that kind of raised a little bit the bar because I wanted to be part of the conversation. And, when you're a kid, even 1 or 2 years, you feel like, oh, you're the preteen, we are teens, and, we have different conversations. Yeah. But I grew up in a community that... So it's almost like within the communist regime, there was this, let's call it a bubble, or Christian bubble, our friends bubble, where we felt seen, to use your language. We grew intellectually, we grew physically, we grew emotionally, we grew spiritually. It was an amazing time in so many different ways, despite what was around us, right? So these are some things, values, community that are part of my story. And I think, I have a very curious mind, and that's how I came here. I wanted to study more. I wanted my horizon to open up. I was an English teacher in Romania at the time. I actually had a good situation in the sense that I was part of a good community. I had a good job. I was a tenured high school student. In Romania, we have a tenure for high school teachers. I was in a relationship. So I had it all in a way, but I didn't have what I wanted. I wanted more. And at the time, I couldn't really define what that more was. And I started with a master's. And I remember my father, when he took me to the airport to come, he said, the only thing I fear is not that you will not succeed, is that you would want to go for a PhD. And I was like, oh, come on, Dad.
Of course.
No, it was just for 2 years. And then here I am 21 years later.
For anybody who has been listening to this podcast, I want to point something out. And that is your countenance right now.
Okay.
Because during the early part of this podcast, and this is the point of this entire story, and that is, you are smiling, you are glowing, you are animated, your hands are moving, your verbal inflection completely changed. Because early in this conversation, you were with a notebook in hand because you were going to listen to the questions. It was very academic. We talked about brokers. We talked about sponsors. We talked about all of these very academic things. And yet the minute I turned to the conversation and asked you to tell me about your story, everything about your energy changed. And I do that demonstratively because I want to point out that even to a girl who came in here very academic to have a conversation about the power of immigration and so on and so forth, the minute we focus our energy on an individual and give a moment for that individual to tell the highlights of their own story, and while your story is amazing and the power of positive thinking and positivity in your life. And I knew I was going to go do great things. And I always felt seen and I always felt heard. And I always felt that although the world around me was literally collapsing, I never felt like that was a problem, which is a testament to your parents, and the community. But I want to really point out everything about you changed when you started telling a story. And there's no other way to capstone the entire conversation than literally just saying, did I just trick you into doing that? But literally seeing the way that everything about you, your countenance, the fact that you got into they called me curly kind of story, because even subtle nuances mattered. Like even the things about I had curly hair and my family didn't, like that's part of your story. And when you tell that part of the story, like you physically change, like you physiologically change. I guarantee you that telling that story is an oxytocin pump in your brain. Like there's a serotonin release that's taking place because
parts of that were traumatic.
I'm sure parts of it were, but
I tried to resolve them.
But whether our stories are traumatic or not, there are stories.
Correct.
And in the being seen and the being heard, like what I want anybody, and you can agree with me or not, but what I would want anybody to take away from this conversation is take the time to listen to other people's stories. Because when N equals 1, everything changes. Like one-on-one relationship is just so different than trying to take a community of people and categorize them rather than individualizing things. Because even an academic, when given a microphone to tell a story, physically changes.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And I think, your point in emphasizing the individual story versus, masses of, I don't know, we can name the ethnic group that we want, right? But maybe we shouldn't. But, it does dehumanize. And, I think I appreciate you making that point, because I feel like I've been doing it for too long, that for me, it's I'm a humanist. I'm in the humanities. This is what I do.
You want to put light on people.
Right. And I think that's a very important point too.
Well,
an important takeaway.
Thank you for that. And thank you for what you do with students here in South Florida, and obviously students from abroad who are coming here to study in South Florida. Congratulations on your new position at the University of Miami. They're lucky to have you. But for anybody who is listening, who wants to learn more, talk to you, maybe just tell their story, how would they go about getting a hold of you? Can they find you at the University of Miami website?
Officially, my position starts in August, so I'm still affiliated with Barry University. But I'm very easy to find if you just do a search for my name.
We'll put some stuff here in the show notes
and
so that you know the spelling.
I will give you, right. And it's easier. I mean, in a lot of, I just use the same handle, the first two letters of my name, Lee, and then my last name, Mihut, on Instagram. I'm going to try to post more often, but I think starting in the fall, I will have I'm hoping to collect more stories, so I'm hoping to provide more opportunities for especially South Floridians to tell their stories.
I love that. You can check it out in the show notes. You can actually see the spelling of Ligia Mihut's name and find social handles where you can reach out to her if you've got a story. And let me just give a final note here and say that storytelling is so important. And it's important for us as individuals to want to tell those stories, but sometimes we need to shut up. Like, shut up and listen to somebody else's story, because I think you'll find out that there's a lot of similarities between a lot of those stories. And often people don't need to be helped. They just need to be heard. So I encourage you to do so. If that's my takeaway from today, is shut up. Like, listen to other people's stories.
I think listening is important.
Like, validate where people are. So thank you for listening to Performance Driven Living, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.